Welcome back. Today is day 29 of Bible 365. This is Bible 365 with Kathy Carter, which means I am reading through the Bible every day for the next year, and I'm just kind of giving my thoughts on the passages that I read. So today we are on day 29, which is Job 35 through 36, 21. Oh no, 35 through 37. So we have all of it in here, 35 through 37. And we have worked up to this point the entire book of Job. There's only really a couple of chapters left. If you're joining me for the first time, I really want you guys to go back at least to Job 1, which I think I started on January 19th. But I would love even greater if you went all the way back to Genesis 1. Reading through the Bible chronologically is just going to help you understand much more of God and what he's trying to say to us. And so this is the whole reason I'm doing it, because I think that reading it is the best way that you can get an understanding of who God is. If you have not read today, I want you to go back, put this on pause, go back, read today's 3 chapters, and then come back and then hear what I have to say and see how what you thought compares to what I thought. Because I have a lot of personal stuff today that I really feel sort of goes along with this chapter. I want to be careful because this chapter has really inspired me in a lot of ways. I've actually mostly hated this book. I've always found it pretty depressing. And I'm coming to a conclusion as to why I found it that way and what that means to me going forward. A lot of it was lack of understanding, but some of the understanding that I did have, I actually just didn't like. And so today I'm coming to some of this understanding and I'm trying to wrap my brain around it. So with all that being said, I want to give a entirely teeny tiny synopsis of what's happening. There is a man named Job. Job has 3 friends. Job's life was afflicted with some really terrible things that God allowed Satan to do. But God, being in control of all things and being the ultimate authority, he gave Satan the power to do these things to Job. And so it doesn't give the reason, but it does state that Job is upright, and I believe he said he was blameless, and he also said that he feared God and shunned evil. And so it wasn't necessarily his character that was the issue. And so what we're starting to find is through these conversations, Job is really frustrated, sort of recognizing that his character wasn't the issue, but probably thinking too much of his character. And then his friends were really telling him his character was the issue, and if only he would turn away from sin, then God would give him all these great things. And the reason that the things befell him was because he didn't honor God. And so there's a lot of back and forth between them. And then we just met Elihu, which is the 4th person, who's a little bit younger. And he is actually speaking from a wise place. So he felt the Spirit working through him. He waited for the other guys to kind of finish all the things that they were saying, recognized that they really hadn't answered any of Job's arguments or talking points or any of where he was feeling frustrated. And so he sort of wants to jump in. When he jumps in, he's angry at both Job and at the 3 friends. And so this is not as if, one is right and the other is wrong and he's coming to their defense. He's sort of saying, you're all wrong. And essentially he's coming to God's defense because he believes that they have not properly represented God. So that being said, this is chapters 35 through 37. So I want to move to them in the first 2 in a little bit of a quicker way, because I really love this 3rd chapter that we're reading, because I feel like it's really eloquent and it focuses a lot on the power of God. Some of the powers I think that we neglect, maybe not necessarily forget, but definitely don't take a lot of time, effort, and energy on. So if I go to verse 1, in chapter 35, I want to remind you guys that it is still Elihu speaking, and he's speaking to Job, but I'm sure all 3 friends are there as well. And so he's really speaking to all of them. And so in verses 2 and 3, it says, do you think this is just? You say, I'm in the right, not God. Yet you ask him, what profit is to me? And what do I gain by not sinning? So I became a believer when I was an adult, and I was an atheist before that. So it wasn't as if I believed in that there was a God at all. It wasn't that I thought that there was a God, but I didn't recognize his true power. I didn't even think he existed. So I have a little bit of trouble with some of these thoughts and ideas of someone who does believe God exists, but um, they don't think it's any big deal to sin, that they're sort of content, and they believe that God is God, and whatever they do kind of doesn't matter. So for me, this wasn't super personal, but I know that I hear this a lot, and I know people do feel this way. They believe that their actions really don't matter. That God is love, God is just, God is all good things, and luckily, as long as you're a good person, you're going to go to heaven. And maybe or maybe not be afflicted, but God really doesn't say that. And as we've been going through scripture, we can see that that's not true, because we can see that Abraham had issues. We can see that Isaac had issues. We can certainly see that Jacob had issues. And these were the people that God had a covenant with. So God even had a deep personal relationship with these people, and they had issues of their own. If we think of, people who, like Abraham, for instance, had to send his first son away, and his concubine. He had to send both of them away. So he had to live his life without his first son. Only for a very short period of time did he live with his first son. So there are sometimes consequences to our actions, as it said earlier. Sometimes God, Elihu said, sometimes God uses pain to turn us, whoever's in pain, back to God. Sometimes it's consequences. Sometimes it's just that we need a wake up call. We need something to recognize God and who he is. And that gives us opportunity to turn to him. So what profit is it me to gain by not sinning? The profit is being in relationship to God. And so Elihu sort of goes on about this. He recognizes that. So in verses 4-8, he says sin and righteousness actually doesn't affect God. So even when he's saying if you sin or if you don't sin, that's not physically affecting God, but it does affect all of the people around you. And then what happens is people cry out to God, but they've done wickedness. And so they cry out to God and they say, why aren't you answering me? And then God doesn't answer because they've taken on this wickedness. And so it needs to be an understanding for us that although our sin doesn't change God, it doesn't hurt God physically, it doesn't change that. It does hurt people around us. And I believe that God loves people. And so that then would hurt God in that way. And in order to love God and honor God, we should be turning away from sin. Moving on to verses 9-16, it says that God doesn't answer when the wicked cry out. And then it looks to me like Elihu is calling Job one of those people. Like right now he's crying out to God, but is being wicked in the way in which he's crying out to God. So I think that Elihu's a little bit pointing a finger at Job. And then I want to move on to chapter 36, still Elihu speaking. And in verses 2-12, he's still getting info from God. So he tells Job what God does. And this is one of those things that I question. So in verse 6, he says, he does not keep the wicked alive, but gives the afflicted their rights. And then in verse 7, he says, he does not take his eyes off the righteous. He enthrones them with kings and exalts them forever. And now this, a few chapters back, we saw the guys kind of saying the same thing, and then Job was negating that this was true. So his friends were saying this, something similar, that God punishes the wicked and God prospers those who love God. And so then we would ask ourselves, well, then why is Job not prospering? Why is Job going through tragedy right now? And then other people who love God would ask that same thing, right? Like if God does exalt us, then why am I suffering? Why do I have cancer? Why is my kid wayward? Why did I lose my job? Why, right? Like all these things that happen to us. If God really, does that mean my faith isn't strong enough? And so I know that those questions are out there. I know I've been through some of these questions myself. And I'm going to probably argue that I don't think that that's what he means. And this is why. In verse 7, very particularly, it says, he does not take his eyes off the righteous. He enthrones them with kings and exalts them forever. So it's not for this short time on earth, but it's really for eternity when we're with him in eternity. So we will be, those of us who believe, the righteous who believe and love God and honor God, will be exalted forever with God. And then those who do not believe, they will be the ones who will die and they will lose their bodies. Even going to verse 12, it says, "But if they do not listen, they will perish by the sword and die without knowledge." So it seems to be this is an eternal thing versus a sort of a YOLO, you only live, you only live once, do the best that you can here kind of thing. This is something that is eternally. So I want to move on from there, going on to verses 22 to 26, just a lot of how great God is. Elihu is reminding Job about how great God is and the power that God has. So some of these things that I really appreciate so 22 essentially through 33, and I would love to read all of it because I just think it's really poetic and really eloquent. Says he draws up the drops of water which distill as rain to the streams. The clouds pour down their moisture and abundant showers fall on mankind. Who can understand how he spreads out the clouds, how he thunders from his pavilion? See how he scatters his lightning about him, bathing the depths of the sea. And then it moves on to say this is how he governs the nations. And so even verse 33, his thunder announces the coming storm. Even the cattle make known its approach. He does everything. And I think the visual here is the recognition of when you step outside and you see everything that is happening. God does it all, right? So scientifically, we know all these things that happen, right? It rains, moisture comes up into the air, fills the clouds, rains again, right? The clouds move. But God has power over all of that. He created it, which we just read, right? Remember, we read Genesis and now we're reading Job. We read all the way back in the beginning how God made the heavens and the earth, how he separated those things, how he made the clouds and the sky, and how he made the earth and the waters, right? So we learned through that he made all of these things. It doesn't tell us all the details, but we know that he is the creator of all of these things. He holds these things in his hands. He has complete and full control over all of these things whenever he wants to, even to the point where if we move on, I want to move on to verse 13 in the next chapter, chapter 37. Verse 13 says, he brings the clouds to punish people or to water his earth and show his love. So even that we know. When it's great, it's God. When it's not great, it's God. I'm gonna push it. When it's bad, it's God, right? I'm still struggling with that concept. But when it's good, it's God. When it's bad, what we think is bad, it's God, right? Because he has a point and purpose. And then in 14 through 18, I'm going to read this one again. It says, listen to this, Job. Stop and consider God's wonders. Do you know how God controls the clouds and makes his lightning flash? Do you know how the clouds hang poised, those wonders of him who has perfect knowledge? You who swelter in your clothes when the land lies hushed under the south wind, can you join him in spreading out the skies, hard as a mirror of cast bronze? One of my main issues, and I think the reason why I have so disliked this book, is that I fashion a God of my own making in my mind. I am pretty content with a lot of the stuff that God does, right? And the more I'm in my faith, the more I'm content with a lot of those things. The more I go, oh, that makes sense. Oh, he did this because it helps the world do whatever. It helps the environment. It helps this, right? So I have a lot of peace and contentment in a lot of those things. But I have to recognize, if I go back to verse 13, he brings the clouds to punish people. I don't like that one. What if I'm the one he's punishing, right? So, and it doesn't necessarily say he's punishing people for their wicked deeds, right? Although we have them, but that's not necessarily saying that's just who God is. God has the power to do that. And I want God to be a God that loves me, loves other people, is just towards me. So shows, well, let me rephrase that, shows justice by punishing other people for what they've done to me, but doesn't show me justice by punishing me for the things that I have done. That would be too painful. And so I fashion this God of my own making. I listen to this. I love contemporary Christian music, and I listen to this contemporary Christian music. And there is so much music that talks about the grace that I receive from God, the mercy that I receive from God, the goodness that God is, the love that God it gives me, how I am chosen, right? All of these wonderful things. And the reality is I walk away and all I can think is that God has given me everything. By the way, he has. That's not what I'm saying. But I forget all of these other things that he also is. He is justice where justice is needed. And justice is needed all the time because we aren't him. He does these things not just because he can, but because it's what's good and it's what's right. And so when there is punishment and I don't see that it's wicked, right? So for me, I go, well, that can't possibly be wicked. Then I have to believe that God didn't do it because the God that I love wouldn't do that because that isn't right, right? So I have to throw a lot of that away and I have to just sit back and recognize that I am not the one who created the clouds. I'm not the one that makes the snow fall. We just had snow. I'm not the one that makes the snow fall, right? I'm not the one that warms the sun enough to melt that snow, right? I don't have that power. I can't even understand that power. We can't recreate those things. So I can't do those things. And so I am human. Doesn't mean I'm a lowly worm like they talked about earlier, but I am human. I am somebody that has been made and created by this God. And he has the power to do whatever he believes is right to do to me. That doesn't mean that I should just sin all day long because it's meaningless. That means because he is who he is, then I should continue to fear him. I should continue to honor him. And I should continue to love him no matter what. Because and only because he is God. That is what's most important. All right, I just want to move down to verse 23 and 24. And it says, the Almighty is beyond our reach and exalted in power. In his justice and great righteousness, he does not oppress. Therefore, people revere him, for does he not have regard for all the wise in heart? So I just want to be wise in heart, and I want to honor him because he is the Almighty, because he is exalted in power, and because he does not oppress. So this is the God that I follow, even when it's uncomfortable, even when I don't understand, even when there's something that befalls me that I don't like. I continue to follow the God of Job, the God of Abraham, and the God of me. So I'm going to end that today. I'm sure there are so many other things to talk about, and I would definitely love to hear from you guys. So I really want you to comment below. What are your thoughts, even in some of the things that I said, or some of the things that you read? Did you see some of these things? Did you recognize the power of who he is, or did something else hit you like a brick that you want to share with me? So please just comment below, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. And then like this, subscribe to it, share it with other people, read your Bible with yourself and with other people, obviously with me as well. And we will move on tomorrow to the 30th day.